Tonight's story is The Rose Elf by Hans Christian Andersen. In the middle of a garden there grew a rose tree, which was quite full of roses, and in one of these, the most beautiful of them all, lived an elf. He was so tiny that no human eye could see him. Behind every petal of the rose he had a bedroom. He was as shapely and as lovely as any child could be, and he had wings reaching down from his shoulders to his feet. Oh, what a scent there was in his rooms, and how bright and beautiful were the walls. They, of course, were the delicate pale pink rose petals. All the day he reveled in the warm sunshine, flitting from flower to flower, dancing on the butterfly's wings as it flew, and measuring how many steps it took him to run across all the roads and footpaths there were on a single lime leaf. They were what we call the veins of the leaf, that he took for roads and footpaths. And indeed, to him, they were never-ending roads. Before he had finished, the sun had set. He had been there too late in the starting. It turned so very cold. The dew was falling, and there was a wind. He had better see about getting home. He hurried for all he was worth, but the rose had closed, and he couldn't get in. Not one rose was open. The poor little elf got so frightened. He had never been out of the night at night before, and had always slept so sweetly behind the snug rose petals. This would be the death of him, he thought. At the other end of the garden he knew there was an arbor of lovely honeysuckle, with blossom which looked like large painted horns. He would creep into one of these and sleep there till the morning. So off he flew. Shh! There were two people in there, a handsome young man and the loveliest of girls. They sat side by side, wishing never more to be parted. They were so very fond of each other, much more than even the best of children are fond of their mothers and fathers. "Yet part we must," said the young man. "Your brother isn't good to us, and so is sending me on an errand, far away over mountains and seas. Goodbye, my sweet bride, for that is what you are." And then they kissed each other, and the young woman wept and gave him a rose. But before handing it to him, she pressed it to her lips and kissed it so firmly and warmly that the flower opened. Seeing this, the little elf flew into it and rested his head against the delicate, fragrant walls. But he could plainly hear them saying, "Goodbye, goodbye," and he felt that the rose was placed on the young man's breast. Oh, how the heart did beat in there! The little elf just couldn't fall asleep for its beating. It wasn't long that the rose lay undisturbed on the man's breast. He took it out, and as he walked alone through the dark woods, he kissed the flower, so often and so passionately that the little elf was very nearly crushed to death. He could feel through the petals how the young man's lips burnt, and the rose had opened out, as in the hottest midday sun. Suddenly another man appeared, dark and angry. He was the beautiful girl's wicked brother. Out came his big, sharp knife, and as the other kissed the rose, the wicked man stabbed him to death. Then, cutting off his head, he buried it with the body in the soft earth under a lime tree. "Now he's dead and gone," thought the wicked brother. "He'll never come back any more." It was a long journey he was making, over the mountains and seas, where it is easy to lose one's life, and he's lost it. He won't return, and my sister will never dare to ask me about him. Then with his foot he scraped dead leaves over the disturbed soil and went off home in the darkness of night. But he didn't go alone, as he believed. The little elf went with him. He sat in a withered, rolled-up lime leaf which had fallen on to the wicked man's hair when he was digging the grave. His hat was over him now. It was so dark in there, and the elf was trembling with fear and anger at the foul deed. Early in the morning, the wicked man arrived home. He took his hat off and went into his sister's bedroom. There lay the beautiful girl in the bloom of youth, dreaming about him of whom she was so fond, and who she believed was going over mountains and through forests. And stooping over her, the wicked brother gave an ugly laugh, such as a demon might laugh. At that moment the dead leaf fell from his hair onto the counterpane, but he did not notice it, and went out to get a little early morning sleep himself. The elf, however, slipped out of the dead leaf, crept into the sleeping girl's ear, and as though in a dream, told her of the dreadful murder, described to her the place where her brother had killed the man and left his body, and told her about the lime tree which blossomed close by, saying, "To prove that to you that it is not just a dream that I have told you, you will find on your bed a dead leaf." And when she woke up, she did find it. And oh, the salt tears that she wept. And to no one dared she tell her grief. The window stood open all day long, and the little elf could easily have got out into the garden, to the roses and all the other flowers, only he hadn't the heart to leave her so sad. On the window-sill was a bush of monthly roses, and settling there in one of the roses, he sat and watched the poor girl. Her brother came into the room many times and was so merry and wicked, but she didn't dare say a word about her great grief. As soon as it was night, she stole out of the house, and going into the wood to the place where the lime tree grew, she swept the leaves off the ground, dug down into it, and found at once the one who had been killed. Oh, how she cried, and prayed to the Lord that she too might soon die. Gladly would she have carried the body home, had she been able to, but she took the pale head with the closed eyes, kissed the cold lips, and shook the soil out of his handsome hair. "This I shall keep," she said. And when she had placed earth and leaves over the dead body, she took home the head, together with a small sprig of mock orange, which blossomed in the wood where he had been killed. Back in her room she fetched the biggest flower pot she could find, and placing the dead man's head in this, she put soil on it, and then planted the sprig of mock orange. "Goodbye, goodbye," whispered the little elf. He could no longer bear to see all this sorrow, and so he flew into the garden to his rose, but this had faded, and only a few wan petals clung to the green hip. "Ah, how soon all that is beautiful and good passes away," sighed the elf. At length he found another rose. He made this his house, and behind its fragrant, delicate petals he settled down to live. Every morning he would fly across to the poor girl's window, and always she would be standing there by the flower-pot weeping. The salt tears fell onto the mock orange, and for every day that she grew paler and paler, the sprig got fresher and greener. One shoot grew out after the other. Little white buds turned into blossom, and she would kiss them. But the wicked brother would scold her and ask if she had lost her wits. He didn't like her to be always crying over the flower-pot, and couldn't understand why she did. Little did he know of the eyes that were closed, and the red lips that had turned to earth. And she bent her head towards the flower-pot, and the little elf from the rose found her there asleep. Climbing into her ear, he spoke to her about the evening in the arbor, about the fragrance of the rose, and the love of elves. So sweetly did she dream, and as she dreamt her life slipped away. She had died a peaceful death, and was in heaven with the one she held dear. And the orange blossoms opened their big white bells, smelling so wonderfully sweet. This was their only way of weeping for the dead. But seeing the beautiful blossoming tree, the wicked brother took it as an heirloom for himself, and placed it in his bedroom close to his bed. For it was lovely to look at, and the scent was so sweet and delicious. The little rose elf went with it, flying from blossom to blossom. There lived a little soul in every one, and to each of them he told the story of the murdered young man whose head was now earth under the earth, and of the wicked brother and the poor sister. "We know about it," said all the creatures in the flowers. "We know about it. Didn't we grow up from the dead man's eyes and lips? We know about it. We know about it." And they nodded their heads so strangely. The rose elf couldn't make out why they took it so calmly, and he flew out to the bees gathering honey and told them the story of the wicked brother, and the bees told it to their queen, who commanded them all to kill the murderer the next morning. But in the night, it was the first night after the sister's death, when her brother was asleep in bed near to the fragrant orange blossom, each flower opened its cup, and invisibly, but bearing poisoned spears, the flower spirits came out. Sitting first at his ear, they told him evil dreams. And then they flew over his lips and stabbed his tongue with the poisoned spears. "Now we have avenged the dead," they said, and they went back into the white bells of the orange blossom. When morning came, and the window of the bedroom was thrown open, the rose elf, with the queen bee and the whole swarm of bees, hurried in to kill him. But he was already dead. People were standing around the bed and saying, "The scent of the orange blossom has killed him." Then all at once the rose elf understood the flower's revenge, and he told it to the queen of the bees, and with her whole swarm she flew buzzing around the flower pot. Then a man took the flower pot away, and one of the bees stung his hand, making him drop the pot and break it. And then they saw the whitened skull, and knew that the dead man in the bed was a murderer. And the queen bee hummed in the air and sang of the blossom's revenge, and of the rose elf, and of how behind the smallest petal there lives one who can tell and can avenge a wrong. That was the end of the story, The Rose Elf. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a good night.